Hi, I'm Josh Carter, and this is Flying for Life. We're heading to the vast, isolated region of Arnhem Land, the northeasterly tip of Australia's Northern Territory and home to the Aboriginal Yolngu people. MAF Arnhem Land turned 50 in November, and to help us celebrate that incredible milestone, I'm joined by pilot Matt Henderson, MAF Arnhem Land's country director, and Natalie Morreau, acting manager at the Miyalk Domestic and Family Violence Shelter, one of MAF's partners, which has been empowering women for over 35 years. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us on the Flying for Life podcast. Really excited to find out about what's going on in Northern Australia. Matt, can you give us a bit more of a better kind of geographical description of Arnhem Land?
Arnhem Land, the size of Scotland and Wales. The population is between about 16 and 18,000.
Okay, so that means everyone's pretty spread out then, yeah?
Pretty spread out
And remote?
and remote. It's tough to imagine a little bit that we're in a developed country, the same country that has the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but we're incredibly remote.
So just sort of tell us how far away, for example, would the nearest hospital be for most people?
We are very blessed to have a hospital in Nhulunbuy, which is the town where a lot of us live. But that's the next closest hospital would be about 1,000 kilometers away. To give you an idea, we're at 700 kilometers down a dirt road to a McDonald's. So serious deprivation here. What's your equivalent to a hardware store? Is it home base?
Yeah, home base. Yeah.
Yeah. So your closest home base would be about 1,000 kilometers, and most of that's in the dirt.
Okay. Wow.
When we say dirt, it's rough dirt. So
Yeah.
you might only want to go pretty slow on that. So it could take 10 to 15 hours to travel that dirt road. It's pretty remote.
Now, guys, people listening might be surprised to hear that MAF is working in Australia. You know, as you mentioned there, your image of Australia is really one of wealth, to be honest. Thinking like you said about, places like Sydney and, your amazing coastline and all that. So this area of Australia quite different, yeah?
Australia is one of the few countries we call First Nations, which is when you have a developed country but have an indigenous people that are in a very non-developed area. Yes, a country with big cities and Sydney and Melbourne and Perth and Brisbane, that we actually have a non-developed region within that. And we're coming into wet season, Josh, too. So we're preparing new pilots and planes and to get ready for wet seasons. It is hard to still imagine in 2023 that some of those homelands are still cut off in the wet. So for the most part, over the years, we've been here, half a century now. So there's been a lot of development in that time for the main roads, main arteries in and out. They're still very rough four-wheel drive tracks, but they're passable. But the reality is that it's still not developed enough that as we get into wet season, some of those places might have access for maybe half or even the majority of the year. But we'll have a few months where they're only accessible by boat if they're coastal or by airplane.
Can you explain a little bit about the kind of homelands set up geographically as well? Because I think, from us particularly listening in the UK, that's kind of hard to get our head around. Explain that for us, if that's okay.
This region, because it is so inaccessible, it's geographically stayed quite isolated. We talk about homelands and communities. So homelands can be maybe only 10 people, or maybe up to about 60 or 80 people in a larger homeland. And usually the people that would live in there, they'd be very closely related. So it'd be obviously Aboriginal people, but they would be, your sort of your siblings and their kids and grandparents. Like it's a very tight-knit, the homelands are quite small groups. And then the communities, they might be up to maybe 800 or 1,000 people in some of the communities. A couple of them are up to about 3,000, almost the same size as Nhulunbuy, but if that helps a bit. But in a homeland, you wouldn't have any. There'd be no mobile service in terms of phone service, internet. There are power and water supplies that you get there. So it's bore water and some solar power, but very basic sort of provision there.
Yeah, and of course, MAF Arnhem Land turning 50 in November. Really amazing. So how did that all start there, Matt?
In the 40s, there's a gentleman, they called him Papa Sheppy, Harold Shepherdson, and he was a pastor. He had an airplane.
Am I right in saying that they built their own plane originally as well?
Actually, I think it was a kit plane. I don't know if it came from America or Australia. He did essentially have it shipped out here and then built it and then flew it. That's bold. If there was an airplane, it may not have been one of those that they had one of the pilots had a prop strike and he took the tip of the propeller off, but they were the old wooden propellers. And so he thought the safest thing to do was to go to the other side propeller and just cut it off the same amount. So it made it relatively balanced and then they flew it out. But lots of stories. He had a mission based on Elko Island and he was getting up in years and looking to hand it over. And it had developed and the need was still there. And essentially approached MAF. And in 1973 is when we assumed operation of what had begun sort of the first airline in Arnhem Land. And we've been doing that ever since. So it was sort of a handover from the missions days. He was at Elko Island, which is now the Shepherdson College, which is named after him. And Harold Shepherdson would take a boat to the mainland. They would walk for 3 weeks and they found an area in the bush and they would just cut the trees and make an airstrip. A couple of weeks, he'd walk back, get in his boat, go back to the island, get his airplane, and then fly over and land on it. Wow. And then it's how they would, one by one, they sort of spread the airstrips around Arnhem Land. And then again, MAF picked up that work in 1973.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Literally going to clear some space to land your plane. Brilliant. So, Matt, can you just tell us what the setup is now for MAF Arnhem Land? What does it look like in terms of numbers of planes and numbers of flights?
At this stage, we're largely based at Gove Airport, and we're flying 8 aircraft in total. We have 50 plus airstrips that we access very regularly each week. And with our school flying, we go to 9 different homelands, and that's where we bring teachers into the homelands. And then for the older children, we pick children up and bring them to one homeland for their studying. Last year alone, we flew over 9,000 people across the Northern Territory. Within Australia and the Northern Territory, it's more than 3/4 of it is up here in Northeast Arnhem Land. We do venture out of our pocket, but just what we do is mostly serving that very remote Gove Peninsula area of Northeast Arnhem Land.
So 50 locations each week. Is that 50 different airstrips?
It is.
Wow.
There's about around 90 in the region, but some based on people coming and going with ceremony, they may or may not be populated. They may just have deteriorated to a point that we can't use them. So people have to get to a neighboring airstrip.
And how many of those 50 airstrips did MAF build?
Over the years, as they expanded, the Homeland Ranger Group, they would have helped do that, and they maintain them now. But the initial ones all would have been cut by hand, hand tools. And I still know a couple of the old men in a couple of places like Dallenboy and Gulamaru, and I sit down with them between flights and talk about it. And I remember sitting with an old man, he'd be in his 80s, and he'll point, he says, "You see this?" He says, "I did this when I was a boy." And he and his brothers and all their mates, they remember as teenagers, they would go out there and they'd have to pull the trees out to the stumps and then dig the roots out, and then they graded the whole thing just with hand tools. It's amazing. There's still people now that are alive that remember doing that as kids.
Amazing. And those airstrips, how many of them are concrete and how many are dirt? Like, what's the kind of percentage?
Oh, 95% would be dirt or clay or gravel airstrips. There's only a few of the very larger communities that would be paved bitumen airstrip. Maybe probably 7 of our main airstrips that we go to in the region would be paved.
So, Natalie, let's bring you in. Your shelter launched back in 1987. Tell us about your organisation.
So, work at the Miyalk Domestic and Family Violence Shelter. So, we do see families that are definitely struggling, families that, don't have the same resources or access to resources that other families have. Miyalk is the Yolngu name for woman, if you're wondering what that word is. So it has changed a lot, the purpose, and obviously the funding. It sometimes was more of a respite place for women. It's been a crisis accommodation, but as it stands currently, our primary focus is supporting women and their children who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing domestic and family violence. So our focus is quite specific.
Could you give us a kind of rough kind of overview? What sort of situations are these women coming out of?
Yeah. Our primary client group are from the Indigenous communities here. So we will take anyone who has experienced violence within their home or from their family or their partner. Women know that they can reach out to us if they can sense that things are escalating within their community, because the women that we work with, they're the experts in their own situation and their own safety. So they will call us. We receive referrals from lots of different people. So there's health workers that travel out into the homelands. They may call us. We might get referrals from police or from the hospital, from families or friends of the people involved, or the women might contact us directly. So we have a chat to them. We find out what they need. If they're wanting to come in and stay at the shelter, we have we can sleep about approximately 12 people there. So when it's full, it's very full, particularly if you throw in a few kids. So we can house up to 12, but we don't just house women. We also do outreach support, or if women want to stay in their community, we will do what we can around that. So this is where MAF comes into play for us and plays a really important role for us because of the region, because we, even though we're based in Nhulunbuy town, we actually service all of East Arnhem Land. So if we receive a call from a woman who Ramangini happened today or happened last night, rings up, she's been assaulted, she needs to get somewhere safe. We ring MAF and we say, hey, we've got this lady, we need to get her out of community. Have you guys got any flights? And we do try to utilize MAF's, what you call RPT. I don't even know what RPT stands for.
So it's a regular public transport, which is our shuttle, which puts us in the homelands at a regular basis each day. They call it, it's just a shuttled service, so you can buy a single ticket.
So we try to utilize that to get women in, but there are occasions that it's just not available and we need to get them out quickly. And these guys here are amazing, and will organise a flight for a woman to be picked up and brought back to us where she's safe, and then we can start to support her and do case management around her situation and what she wants. We're very client focused. It's about what the woman wants and feels she needs to be safe. So that's kind of what we do. And then in the shelter, we also have my actual position that I usually sit in is the wellbeing worker. So that's where we can do anything from pamper sessions to trauma informed counselling, all of that. And then we also have a children and families worker, as well as an outreach worker, which will support women who don't want to come into the shelter or who want to return to community after they've stayed with us.
And Matt, I'm guessing that one of the best things about the partnership is the time that you save that organisation in terms of travel. I'm kind of guessing that's one of the most beneficial things.
It is. It's not even time; it's whether it's possible or not possible. About a week or so ago, something was very time critical, and I had a window of maybe an hour where we thought it would be safe enough to bring in an airplane without anyone having compromised safety to the pilot or to other staff, and to have the woman able to leave. So I mean, and again, you're talking about places that they may or may not even have a vehicle to drive the 10 hours on the track, or depending on the location that they're at. I mean, the one of the places Natalie mentioned is about that, at that 10-hour mark, depending on how rough the road is.
You said that it would have taken 10 hours to, get the lady to the shelter by road. How long did it take on an MAF plane?
That's less than an hour's flight.
Okay.
45, 50 minutes. And
it's one thing to say it would be 10 hours on road, but we may not, like, we wouldn't be able to drive out and get her, and it may not be safe, for anyone else to go out and get, there actually is no other option. And Matt and I had a conversation the other day about the safety of pilots, and we would never want to put MAF in danger, but the reality is that's what they fly into. They don't know if the perpetrator's going to be there waiting. They don't know, and we try to involve police as much as we can, but some of these communities, they're hours away from the closest police station. They may not have any other services actually in that homeland. So these guys don't know what they're flying into sometimes, and I don't want to at all undervalue that, like the risk that they actually do, but we wouldn't get these women to us without that support.
And I was just thinking too, we talk about some of these extractions, Josh, they can be quite obviously emotional, and this coming from a person who's already showed violent tendencies. So I'm just envisioning is what you just described, and if we were able to have a four-wheel drive and accessible, that then all of a sudden we've got someone running out of a community in a four-wheel drive down a really rough track in an area with only satellite phone coverage, which they wouldn't have, with an angry mob behind them, with the ability to follow. And I can tell you Natalie's right. We do try to be very careful with pilots, and I've done several of them myself, and we really, pride's not the right word, but we're proud to be able to do it, and it's worth it. So yes, there is a risk, inherent risk, but it's worth it.
Have there been any incidences of violence towards pilots as a result of rescue attempts?
Oh yeah, I've been kicked, I've been spit at, I've been rocks thrown in. In fact, once I was at a place called Miyalk, and the gentleman who helps us on the ground there works with another mission partner organization, and there was about 6 or 8 people holding rocks the size of cricket balls, and I had the airplane parked quite close to the fence, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Look, I told the family, so we're going to be in the way of the next flight that needs to come in, so we'll keep talking, but I just need to move this aircraft out of the way." And so it's a big Cessna Caravan. It's loaded up, full passengers, and Ed and I are pushing it together. And he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Do you think we're out of throwing distance?" He says, "I think so." And so I said, "I'll wait till you get to the fence." And so he ran in and jumped through the gate, shut the fence, and then I started the engine, the propeller spins, and the rocks just started flying through the air. But we were out of throwing range, luckily, so we taxied away. And occasionally, that's the nature of our relationship. We'll speak with the person who's maybe coordinating them getting out of community, and we'll just call them quietly on the phone when we're ready to go, and they'll just sort of walk out quickly, jump in the plane, and we just want to get out before they clear the fence and start running.
Wow.
So they can be quite loaded situations, and we take precautions as we can, but that's just it. That's the other thing with the aircraft, is that no one else has one to chase us down. So
And when you land into a situation like that, how close to the community are you in terms of like where they're actually living? So where the perpetrator's house may be, have they had to come a while to get to the airstrip, or is it like next door?
well, it depends. So some are maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk. It's just maybe a 500 or 600-meter dirt strip, and right next to it is a line of houses. There's no fence. There's no sort of barrier, and that's actually it. So you can imagine that if it's a woman who's had the courage to make the call, or someone to do it on her behalf, you need to be very careful getting them out quickly, because a lot of family wouldn't want that to happen. It could even bring shame perhaps on the community, because someone's left, or just anger, and they want to stop someone from coming, and there's not a lot to protect it. There's no police in these homeland communities. Some of them, again, there's not even a barrier at some of the airports to protect airside from the community. And then of course, if someone runs onto the runway, then that's an extra safety risk you have to do even before you get the airplane off the ground. So
Wow. I mean, if it wasn't real life, it sounds like a film, really.
it doesn't. The things we normalize.
Yeah, but this is real life. This is not Netflix. Natalie, tell me a little bit about the types of abuse that people suffer. We've heard there about physical violence, but how about coercive control? Is there much of that going on?
Well, when you guys hear the term domestic violence, like what pops to mind? And for most people, it is that physical violence, the hitting and the kicking. But it's so much more than that. Domestic and family violence really revolves around that power and control, and it's one partner having the power and the control over the other, and that plays out in many different ways. And you mentioned coercive control. That's really big, and that's becoming quite a buzzword even in all aspects of Australian culture at the moment. And that covers all areas of life. So that could be isolation. So that's one thing we see out this way, because it is a natural isolation that happens. Women come from their own home, their own homeland, family, into their partner's homeland and family. And if that relationship isn't healthy, that isolation can occur. Children using threats, lots of threats, lots of manipulation, the minimizing, the blaming the survivor rather than taking responsibility for themselves, the emotional abuse, intimidation, all of that plays into it, and all of that's about power and control and having that. So when a woman makes a really strong decision to leave community or to find a safe space for her and her children, that sense of loss and control can actually escalate the risk. And that's for any situation, whether you're in the East Coast in a populated area or out here. So so it actually, these extractions are actually, they come with a lot of risk because of those strong decisions that the women are making. And we see it all. We see that whole spectrum of domestic violence out here, just as you would in any other community. I think maybe one of the differences is white mainstream Australians hide it a lot better, a lot more secretive about it compared to out here.
And also, Natalie, is a strong sense of community, is that sometimes a hindrance to perhaps calling on you guys because they feel like they're in some way betraying the community?
Those relationships are really strong. So it gets very complicated, and the role that woman has in community can get very complicated as well. So in terms of people being willing to report or people being willing to get involved can be quite difficult.
What's the biggest myth that you'd like to bust about domestic violence?
One of them is that domestic violence is only prevalent in uneducated poverty, but it's actually it's across all areas of life. Whether you're well educated, whether you're wealthy, you can still experience domestic and family violence.
So, Matt, let me just bring you back in. What would you say is the worst thing that you've seen in terms of a kind of domestic violence situation? You mentioned the being attacked with rocks and stuff like that, but what about personally for any of the ladies that you've seen? What's the worst thing you think you've seen?
That's something that some of the pilots have struggled with, myself being one of them.
And I think if it was really extreme situation, we would probably be calling O, the police, and their intervention would probably be required. So MAF definitely fills a gap where other services and emergency services aren't.
We realize how critical the time is. We might have, like you said, we might have a narrow window to get there. We've definitely flown victims of domestic violence who it's obvious that they've been victims of domestic violence, but not critical in the nature of any life support or that type of thing. But there's definitely the urgency, I suppose. So it's a bit of a scramble to make sure we can do it in as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a whole episode of the podcast on Medivacs. Actually, if anyone listening is interested, go and find that, because it's very, very fascinating what you guys do. What's the worst thing you've seen, Matt, in terms of kind of rescuing somebody and having to take them away?
I know one of the things that makes Australia, particularly the Northern Territory, famous is its crocodile population. And you do see lots of them. It's one of the things we like to point out, especially to brand new school teachers that we take out, that we take them to their remote homeland, and we point out 2 or 3 resident crocodiles that live within, meters of the school they'll be teaching at. We see them from the air, low level. But no, we did have we've had a couple. One particular one comes to mind. It's about 2 years ago now. There was a young boy who was swimming in a billabong and had a crocodile attack. He did survive, so it was a good story. And it was we were threading the needle on last light and a few rules to get a pilot there to get him in and out. But we were able to do that.
Yeah. So was that because the child went, I don't know, and poked it with a stick, or did the crocodile come sort of into the homeland? What's going on? Like, where did they meet?
Well, again, these are people who live in the land and on the land, and it's something that, again, we would, in our culture, we would build, giant concrete walls and glass structures and do all these protective mechanisms, but it is accepted as part of their reality. So the rivers where these very dangerous creatures live, that's where water comes from, that's where their fish comes from. You get mussels, they might clean, they might cool off because there's no air conditioning in them. So they kind of have to coexist with the same rivers where the crocodile population lives. And so in that particular case, he was a young boy. I don't think he was definitely not looking for or provoke. You do not look for or provoke crocodiles here. Unfortunately, by the time you see them, they're quite good predators. By the time you see them, it's probably too late. They've been scoping you out for quite a while. So in his case, he was just in the billabong. He might have been hand line fishing or something in the billabong, but he wouldn't have been looking to go there if he knew what he was in for.
You mentioned crocodiles. Anything else we need to watch out for where you are, animal wise?
Buffalo.
Yeah, buffalo, that's a frequent hazard at airstrips. We do a go round in an airplane, so you have to do a normal strip assessment, and you fly down low level and you have a look. And I've gone around for buffaloes, cows, donkeys, dogs. Interestingly enough, a couple electric scooters have made their way out to homelands, which I just couldn't imagine seeing in my wildest. And we've had to go around for children running up and down the airstrip, because sometimes it's the only smooth area to ride bicycles on is the airstrip. So
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, I guess. So what do? You're coming down to land, and suddenly there's a buffalo. What do you do? Have you got like a horn? Can you scare it away, or do you just have to wait until it's gone?
good question. Sometimes we've had pesky ones that don't seem to be too bothered with the airplanes, and we have to give it up. But generally, you'd sort of level off at 5 or 10 feet, and you'd give it a bit of a haircut and make some noise. And usually, if you go around, they've moved off. They are skittish, so usually you can move a buffalo off.
And if they don't move, what do? You just have to wait, I suppose.
Oddly enough, you wouldn't believe this, Josh, but where they don't have mobile phone services, a lot of these communities have a payphone, which seems really bizarre. So you get to have an airplane in the middle of the bush, and there's a phone booth, not little red ones like you'd have in London, but a phone booth. And we could radio to our operations staff, who will then call the community payphone and will explain what's going on. And sometimes we can get someone to come out with a stick or maybe another vehicle and chase things off the runway. Or in the event of a broken down 4-wheel drive, they had to drag it off the runway so that we could land.
Matt, across your 7 years then of working there, what would you say is your most memorable flight?
One morning, I was given we do patient travel flights, and the normal practice here in Arnhem Land is if a woman is in about 8.5 months pregnant, so just last 2 weeks of pregnancy, we pick them up and they're flown in by the hospital to the hospital to have the babies in town. And so one morning I had patient travel and I had 2 stops to make, and I was picking up 3 women, all 3 of which were 8.5 months pregnant. And I found out before we took off that one of the women was in active labor. So I had to land and picked up 2 women, one in active labor, do a flight, and then land at a second airstrip to pick up a 3rd woman, 8.5 months pregnant, and bring them all in. And I'm by myself, and it was a particularly poor weather day. And I'm just saying, please, Jesus, don't make me have to change the manifest sheets from 4 passengers on board to 5 on the way into hospital today. So that is one of my higher anxiety days, I remember.
So you were the only other person on the flight. You didn't have a nurse or a midwife with you or anything?
Nope, just me and the Lord Jesus and these 3 very large women. And And an appendix to that story, I was actually quite proud. I got to fly two of those mums and their babies back to their communities. And only about 2 years ago, I was on one of the shuttle runs, and a woman said hello, and she says, "You know this boy?" And she said, "When you flew him the first time, he was in my belly."
Aw.
And she remembered that I was the pilot who flew her, and that was pretty cool. And of course, now he's 5 years old or something.
Wow, what an amazing story. So, Mac, tell us about the school run as well, because we've talked about Medivacs and, helping the Miyalk organisation with the domestic violence, but also the school run, something we're used to here in the UK, but not quite in the same way. Tell us about that.
Education's a big one. Natalie mentioned the generation here that's just disempowered. So, like any culture, knowledge is power, and if you want them to have a voice in their own future, it's worthwhile spending effort in education. So, we do a few things in the education sector. One is a group where we take for primary age students, the younger ones. We fly teachers out to homelands, and they spend several days a week in the homelands. At the secondary level or high school level, they have basically a remote school where we gather students from some of the same communities, about 9 different communities, and bring them into that school. And then another way we serve in education is there's a boarding school that's located right in Nhulunbuy, and we pick up people, some are 2.5, 3 hour flight even, from all over the Northern Australia, and bring them into this Indigenous boarding school. So there's a few different ways that education can be accessed, but obviously, given the context, aircraft factor into it very much.
It's a very exciting school run for the children, I'm sure, if they get to go in a
It,
plane to go to school. I suppose education would be very difficult without MAF.
it would. I mean, it would be. I mean, the alternatives. I mean, some of those communities don't have education at any level, and the alternative again is to send out teachers and staff out in 4-wheel drives, which again, it's wear and tear on the vehicles, it's wear and tear on the educators who aren't there to be trained 4-wheel drive tour guides. They're there to teach, but that's part of a prerequisite for their job if you want to do it. And so it does save a lot of time and energy and effort for them to be able to do that, because that's the alternative. And then, of course, we've discussed places that are still not accessible at all by vehicle.
So, Natalie, from your perspective, how much of a lifeline would you say MAF is to the people of Arnhem Land today?
Well, definitely in our space of extracting women from communities, we wouldn't be able to have the reach that we have, and the impact that we have as a service, without MAF and without that partnership.
According to the NT Council of Social Services, the NT has the highest rate of domestic violence in Australia. That's the Northern Territory, of course, we're talking about there, with around 60 incidences per day. 89% of survivors are Aboriginal women. So, how many women are able to be rescued because of MAF? Would you say? Have you got an exact number for us? Maybe in a year or a month? Like how many women's lives are changed?
And so in the last 24 months, we had 102 flights. Might be several in a week and none in another, but it's averaging almost one a week. In that same time period, there's been 82 adults, 38 children, and 17 flown out of this region, either to leave a situation here or to be repatriated and taken back home.
Which is a really important part of it. Like, we've focused a lot on the extractions, but a really important part is this: like, Nhulunbuy isn't the homeland, it's not the community, it's not where their family are. And so that's only half the journey of coming and becoming safe, but actually transitioning back into community, back to where their family are, back to their supports, particularly given that Yolngu people are so connected and to their land and to their families. So we rely heavily on MAF in that aspect of transitioning back into community as well, and that's probably more the RPT flights that we utilize. They're not the urgent flights, but without that, we wouldn't necessarily have the resources to transition women back into community so that their lives can continue where they want to be. So that's actually a really important part of our partnership as well. And further to that too, like our outreach worker who goes into community. She's able to, she will access those RPT flights to be able to go. And a part of that's the early intervention. And whilst we are a crisis service, we really want to have focus on that early intervention and bringing education and that out into the homelands and communities. So part of her role is going out and doing that in community. And again, to drive there, it's just not a viable option at all. But to be able to fly there and do a session with the women's groups there, it's possible because of MAF and our partnership with them.
Often mentioned is a strong connection to the land. So what does that mean, and what does it look like for those communities?
We worship a creator who created the earth and all that's in it. They worship the creation. And while they have different ways they look at that spirituality, they really worship the creation itself, which also is similar to other, religions, of animism and things like that. So I don't know if that helps a little bit, Josh, but it's very much why it's important for them. So some might say, well, you have a hospital in Nhulunbuy, or you could go to Darwin, which is 1,000 kilometers away, but you can get there. And then why wouldn't you stay in these areas of resource? Well, the reality is because these are clans and families that don't traditionally mix. And so that creates conflict when you're mixing, but also that they have such a strong tie to where they're from. They would speak in the way that I would, if you were my brother, I'd tell this my brother Josh, they would look at a tree or a rock formation that way. And that's how closely they feel with their culture, which again, a lot of the initiatives, and I think probably a more naive or even ignorant Australia would look at and say, well, why do you go to all these lengths to keep them in homelands? We see people are much, if we can bring the services to them, whether it's education or whether it's healthcare or whether it's safety, can bring that to them and they can stay in country, they're much healthier. So one of the reasons also why a lot of the groups like Natalie's and like the education groups work so hard to deliver the services where they're at, because it's actually a better outcome for them. It is logistically difficult. It's expensive, obviously, to do services like that, but it's a much better way to love them, I think, and support them in their country where they're at.
Natalie, picture a day tomorrow when MAF doesn't exist. How would that impact what you guys are doing? What would not happen?
Well, that's a bit of a scary thought. Look, there's other charter airlines that we would have to access at quite a high premium. We would probably have to start advocating for further funding from somewhere else to try and cover that. It's awful to have to consider cost when someone's life and safety is at risk. No one wants to be in a decision-making process where that's a concern. So it's a very difficult conversation to have when someone's safety is at risk, and the reality is that it's life and death sometimes.
I always ask this, how can we best be praying for what you guys are doing? After we've listened to all this information, what can we pray for, Natalie?
If people have it on their heart to pray for the women that come through Miyalk shelter, that God would bring restoration into their lives, that he would bring healing, that he would give them the strength to make those hard decisions, and safety, like safety for our staff at Miyalk shelter, safety for the women and children that come through there. Pray for the men that, for the perpetrators, like they need healing and restoration as well. And then I know there's definitely been times in the last few weeks I've been praying for the MAF pilots that are going out, for their safety.
Yeah, well, amen to that. Yeah. Matt, anything to add to that?
The big one is people, the harvest is great, the workers are few. It's a very technical ministry, and it's unusual and difficult to find people who have the technical qualifications to be engineer, to be a pilot, or all the other many support roles that people don't think about when they think of MAF. So it's people to really take up the call. Funding's been a big deal. Everyone struggled, I think, post-COVID. As an organization, we've seen a big hit in financial support, because people maybe are less able to do it. And I'd encourage yourself and listeners to really with a kingdom mindset. What do you do with the abundance that God's given you?
So what's next for you guys, for both of you, in terms of your, outlook and, what you're going to be practically doing? Matt, what's for you?
We'd like to bridge the gap in the medical area. So again, in a very developed Western country, we're seeing people don't have access to basic primary health care. So whether that's medical safaris that go out, whether it's specialist care, people with low mobility to be able to move around, or then of course there's acute and severe. So if you're in a larger community that might have a clinic, or they have access to another air ambulance service that has a much larger aircraft, that's great. And you can be flown to the local hospital here or on flown to a larger hospital in Australia. But if you're a 12 or 15-minute flight away in a homeland, you don't get access to the same healthcare. So one of our initiatives is to develop more medical services to be able to provide equity between all those 50-odd locations we go, that would be on par with what they would get in a larger community.
And Natalie, what's next for you personally?
In terms of Miyalk shelter, we're still going to be there. We're still going to be servicing the women of East Arnhem Land and providing that support regardless of what comes our way. So it's the long run here. Yeah. And it's just keep going with what we're doing, and at Miyalk shelter doing the great work that we do and remaining available and culturally appropriate to the women that we serve.
And that's all we have time for this episode. My big thanks to Matt Henderson, pilot and MAF Arnhem Land Country Director, and Natalie Morreau, Acting Manager at Miyalk Domestic and Family Violence Shelter, for a fascinating insight into Australia's Arnhem Land. You've been listening to me, Josh Carter, and Flying for Life, MAF UK's podcast. Until next time, bye for now.